Well, after several days of hints this afternoon came the announcement that the Morrison government will pay business a subsidy of $1,500 per fortnight for every stood-down worker that the business keeps on for the duration of this crisis. This is a big shift, and good on the Prime Minister for changing tack on this from his insistence last week that stood-down workers should just report to Centrelink. It's not often we see politicians prepared to admit they might have got it wrong, and credit here to Scott Morrison. But it's not a wage payment just because you call that. It's not a wage payment just because it's marginally more than the beefed-up dole, $1,500 a fortnight paid via your employer rather than $1,100 a fortnight paid via Centrelink. Now, I get what the Prime Minister is trying to do here. He's paying locked-down businesses $1,500 per worker per fortnight, provided they keep the worker on and pay them something like the worker's standard salary. But how that will work in practice is anyone's guess. It's only a wage payment if it's calculated off what people actually earn, the money they usually bring home to pay the bills, for the roof over their head, the cost of educating children, power and phone bills, food on the table, and so on. To pay people fairly, that's simple justice after you shut down their jobs. To pay a one-size-fits-all so-called wage, well, that sounds pretty close to a form of socialism to me, even if it does come from a Liberal government. Now, I listened to all the so-called Liberals over the weekend rejecting the proposition that government pay people their real wage to get through this, and I kept thinking, hang on, if you break it, you fix it. If government policy is forcing people not to work, and I agree with that, then it must be government policy to keep them paid until the government allows them to work again. Without that, here's what really happens. The union officials, well, they all survive. The public servants, they are protected. From the departmental secretaries running the big departments, $900,000 each they're on, to the tens of thousands of other public servants, all on salaries well over $100,000, which is average for everybody else, all paid by you, and you're now without a job. The big foreign multinationals, well, they'll get by because they'll cut costs. They'll keep on their fat cat executives, yet they'll jettison ordinary workers to survive, and they'll play the losers on the share market to win as well. But the engine room of the Australian economy, mum and dad average, the ones who should be our people if you're a Liberal government, well, they get today's new payment, which is not much more than the tarted-up dole announced the other day. And it will be hard for many of them not to go under. At the best of times, these ordinary Australians, they struggle to stay afloat. We haven't had wage increases in this country for many years now. But with this payment, even with this payment, they could still lose their homes, most certainly their hope, and as I really feel for some, their lives. Yet, if we pay them their real wage, or at least a decent chunk of it, like the 80% being paid in the United Kingdom, we know they can pay their mortgages. And that puts money back into the system that the banks can lend to others. It also preserves the dignity of working people who, through no fault of their own, are now in terrible straits. And it keeps money moving in this stressed economy while keeping families in the hope that dad and likely mum will be able to make life normal again. That this whole enforced corona shutdown is just a break from turning up to work as usual while we get on top of all of this and we make people safe, rather than, as kids fear, mum and dad have been sacked. It's hope for middle-aged Australians, good people that too often get thrown on life's scrap heap. As Conservatives, and that's what most Liberals really are, we respect what we have. What we have as a nation, everything we have, the whole balance sheet that Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg are playing around with, these decent, ordinary, quiet Australians have given us through their labour. For all the self-congratulatory talk out of politicians about Australia's near 30 years of world-breaking economic growth, it's ordinary people that have delivered this success through the taxes that they pay and their hard work. So, yes, good on Scott Morrison for now doing what he said he wouldn't do last week. I just wish it was at the 80% of people's actual wages, not a flat rate of about $38,000 a year. But for those without a job today and provided their business that sacked them last week is prepared to put them back on the books, this payment is better than nothing. And in these troubled times, that's something. As far as is reasonably possible, and I think the government is really trying here, we have to do our best to ensure that the economic consequences of coronavirus are not worse than the health consequences. Because this will end. It will end. And we can't get through the pandemic only to find Australia, we've bought ourselves an economic wasteland.